trade map may soon have a new direction. Not west, not south, not north, but Northern Sea Route is a shipping corridor that runs along Russia's Arctic coast. And that matters because this route could offer a shorter maritime link between Europe and Asia. Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Dive brought to you by NewsX. My name is Vineet Malhotra and today we are going to the top of the world, to the Arctic, to understand why Russia is pushing the Northern Sea Route and why India is paying attention. Right now, the Suez Canal is one of the most important shipping links between Europe and Asia. A ship traveling from Europe towards Asia generally passes through the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea and then the Indian Ocean. But the Northern Sea Route takes a completely different path. It runs along Russia's Arctic coast through the Barents, Kara, Laptev and East Siberian seas before reaching the Bering Strait and the Pacific. In simple terms, Suez goes south, the Northern Sea Route goes north, and for some Europe-Asia journeys, going north can mean a significantly shorter distance. The Northern Sea Route has been used historically primarily by indigenous Arctic communities for centuries and later extensively by the Soviet Union for domestic Siberian resource transport, though it was rarely utilized as an international commercial transit route until recent decades. But there is a big catch. This is the Arctic ice. Extreme weather, limited infrastructure and specialized vessels pose a great challenge, so this is not simply a case of drawing a shorter line on a map. A shorter route does not automatically mean an easier route. The big question is, why is Putin pushing for it? Well, for Russia, the Northern Sea Route is much more than a shipping project. It is a strategic bet on the Arctic. Russia wants to develop its Arctic coast, connect its Far Eastern ports, and move its vast natural resources towards Asian markets. And the route is already being tested as an energy corridor. In 2026, Russia has rapidly increased crude oil shipments through the Arctic. 7 cargoes have carried around 6 million barrels of oil. That is already close to half the oil volume sent through the route during entire 2025 navigation season. China is currently the main buyer of this Arctic oil. So for Moscow, this is no longer just a future plan. The Northern Sea Route is already being tested as a commercial and energy corridor. But the question today is, where does India come in here? Well, this is where the story gets interesting. India and Russia have been discussing the Northern Sea Route for years, and India's broader connectivity push with Russia is not built around just one route. There are 3 important options. 1. The international north-south transport corridor connecting India with Iran and Russia. 2. The Chennai-Vladivostok maritime connection linking India with Russia's Far East. The Northern Sea Route is the 3rd, opening up Russia's Arctic to Asian shipping. These are 3 different corridors, but they offer India and Russia one very important advantage: more options, and in a world where shipping routes can be disrupted by war, sanctions, weather or geopolitics, having more than one option can be a strategic advantage. India's eastern maritime corridor is particularly important here, and the Chennai-Vladivostok connection links India's eastern coast with Russia's far east. And look at the difference in distance. Mumbai to St. Petersburg is around 8,600 nautical miles. Chennai to Vladivostok is around 5,647 nautical miles. Government has said that this corridor can cut the journey from more than 40 days to around 24 days, while reducing the distance by about 40%. And the cargo is not just about containers. It's about coal, oil, LNG, fertilizers that could move through this broader India-Russia maritime network. And this may be the most important part of the story. India needs energy. Russia has vast energy resources. So the question is not just how we buy Russian energy. The bigger question is, how do we move it safely, reliably, and at competitive costs? The Northern Sea Route could eventually become one more answer, and that matters even more when traditional shipping choke points face disruption. Think about Suez, the Red Sea, the Black Sea, and the Strait of Hormuz. The last few years have shown how quickly a geopolitical crisis can turn a shipping route into a global bottleneck. For India, the answer is not necessarily to abandon existing routes. It is to build alternatives. Not one perfect route, but several options. And then there is China. There is also a big geopolitical angle to this story. China is already deepening its interest in Arctic shipping. Beijing sees the Arctic as another potential link between Asia and Europe. And for Russia, China is a natural partner because of its geographical proximity and growing economic role in the region. But India's interest gives Moscow another major Asian partner. And for New Delhi, participating in Arctic shipping is about more than trade. It is also about building experience, training specialists, understanding polar shipping, and developing a presence in a region that is becoming increasingly important. Listen in to Vladimir Putin.
Россия всегда, именно всегда выступала, да и сейчас подтверждает свою готовность к сотрудничеству, к использованию преимуществ Северного морского пути. Разумеется, в рамках действующего международного морского права. И те государства, которые хотят с нами работать, проявляют к этому интерес. А это прежде всего наши друзья, Китай, Индия, другие страны. Они обсуждают с нами.
But is the Northern Sea Route the next Suez? Not yet. And this is where we need to separate the hype from reality. The route still has major limitations. Ice conditions can change. The navigation season is limited. Infrastructure and emergency response capabilities are more limited than established global shipping routes, and operating in the Arctic requires specialized vessels, technology, and experience. So, what is India really after? The answer is simple: access to a new trade corridor, access to Russian energy, access to Russian Far East, and access to expertise in polar shipping. That is why this is a long-term play. Putin's Northern Sea Route is not just about ice, it is about the future of trade. Russia wants to turn its Arctic coast into a major economic corridor. China wants more options for Asia-Europe shipping, and India wants more options for trade, energy, and connectivity. The Northern Sea Route may not replace the Suez Canal, at least not anytime soon, but that may not be the point. Because in a world where trade route can be disrupted overnight, the biggest advantage is not having one perfect route. It is having another route, and that is exactly why India is looking north. Let's talk about this with somebody who can put things into perspective. Commodore Anil Jay Singh, former Indian Navy officer, joins us on the program. Sir, appreciate you being here with us. So what do you make of this idea? You know, although I explained that the alternative is there, but it is fraught with a lot of insecurity. It's fraught with a lot of unknown that we cannot compute at this point in time. But after seeing what happened to the Strait of Hormuz, a country like India definitely needs an alternative.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on your show. You've given a very sort of comprehensive overview of the Arctic, and I would agree with everything you've said. But I would also like to add that, at the moment, the way international waters are becoming contested, particularly in our part of the world, which were the traditional sea lines of communication for most countries in the Indian Ocean and beyond, alternate trade routes are going to be one of the drivers for the Arctic development in the Arctic. However, as you brought out, at the moment, it's at a very early stage. Very few ships actually transit the Northern Sea Route. Ships still need to be reinforced and made what is known as the ice class, or be escorted by icebreakers or ships that can cut through ice. From a distance perspective, also, while it's shorter in a manner of speaking, but if the trade were to come to India, it would be much longer. The Northern Sea Route is shorter only, even for China, is shorter only for trade going up to Shanghai. If trade was to come further further west of Shanghai in China, that also would not be very economical for the Chinese. Of course, you mentioned the Chennai-Vladivostok economic corridor. That corridor has been around for a while. We've been talking about it, but it hasn't got the same kind of, it hasn't resonated as much as the IMEC or other trade corridors that we've been talking about. But certainly, it's a very viable corridor. The reason it hasn't really grabbed headlines is because so far the volume of India-Russia trade did not justify or did not merit a major discussion on that. It was there and it was going on with whatever little trade was happening. But now, with the way the world is going, and the more we are, looking at Russia for our critical resources, minerals, oil, gas, energy, etc., the Chennai-Vladivostok corridor is also going to become very important. And then as you also mentioned, the complete north of northern Russia runs along the Northern Sea Route. So Russia actually claims almost 70% of the Arctic as its own, despite the fact that the Arctic actually has 8 nations. The remaining 7 all being NATO, now that Sweden and Finland are also part of NATO. So it's almost, I think, at some point going to be a standoff between Russia and these 7 nations. And sanctions and all which are being imposed in other parts of the world may even find their way into the Arctic. India will have to make some very, very informed choices there. How much do we engage with Russia? What sort of a relationship do we want with Nordic countries? What happens in case of a NATO-Russia standoff in the Arctic? Who do we look at? We have so far conveyed in no uncertain terms that we believe in strategic autonomy. So we will go wherever our interests lie, and it shouldn't be taken as an anti-stance against the other group. But one never knows how this is going to play out. We all know that the Northern Sea Route in the Arctic is going to be where the next geostrategic competition is going to be, and the geopolitical competition is going to be, and the geo-economic competition is going to be. And after some competition is going to become a contestation. Many years ago, if you'll recall, Russia had planted a flag under the North Pole in the Arctic saying that this is all ours. China is not sitting by idly. While China and Russia may be having a comfortable relationship at the moment as far as the Northern Sea Route is concerned, China has developed its own polar Silk Road, which means it has every intention of being a major player in the Arctic with proper assets, platforms, and capability over there. So we don't know how far this China-Russia bonhomie in the Arctic will continue. Whether China will support Russian efforts to make more investments in that area for offshore exploration or movement of trade or looking for seabed resources. We don't know how that will play out. And India also, if it sort of aligns with Russia as far as the Arctic goes, because of benefits that accrue to us, particularly as you mentioned the INSTC, we get a direct route from the Arctic to the Indian Ocean. That would be of benefit to us. But then the China factor will come in. Russia is also looking at further investment. It's trying to get the BRICS Plus construct to start investing in the Arctic. So Russia has got huge stakes in the Arctic. We are actually a big player at the moment. We've been one of the 13 observer nations of the Arctic Council, but we really haven't got many assets in the region except for our, Himadri station, which is located at Svalbard, which was set up in 2008. Though we were signatories to the Svalbard Treaty in 1920, but India does not right now have the capacity to be an active player in the Arctic.
Fair enough, sir.
We can support efforts of the others. We can try and be more involved in, non-infrastructure assets. For example, to just sort of elaborate, India enunciated its own Arctic policy of 2020 in 2022, and if you see the 6 pillars of that policy, there is nothing on security in that. There is transportation and connectivity, which in a way means that if we have any trade passing through the region, we will have to ensure its security. But it talks about science and research. It talks about climate and environment protection, because what happens in the Arctic, as far as climate change goes, affects all of us, because it affects global currents, it affects weather patterns, it affects the rising seawater temperatures, it affects rising sea levels. So we have to very carefully and
fair enough, sir. We've run out of time, but your thoughts and your perspective is very valuable, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll take a short break. Be right back.